All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm a co-founder of Guru. Joining me today is Richard Platt. He's a longtime veteran in systematic and systemic problem solving and innovation. Richard is an innovation consultant as well, who spent many years training trees, problem solving, systematic innovation at Intel. He also has a track record of many successful projects as an independent consultant for various different companies. Richard, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Appreciate it.
So today we want to talk about a somewhat typical situation in many engineering organizations where, as any engineering organization, they're working on problems, the more problems coming up, and more often than not, people might feel overwhelmed, and that sort of creates chaos in the organizations, in the teams, even on the team level. And we'll talk about how potentially we can get out of it. So, Richard, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Alex. I sent you some slides when we were first thinking about discussing this subject. So let's talk about, when the chaos starts, right? So, and basically it's, when there's a problem, undesired event disrupts a system or, the process that you're running, whether that's the product development process, manufacturing process, the design process, and you're basically it's a loss of control that's taking place. And so humans typically react with anger and fear, mostly fear, and how we sort of relate to this in professional terms is, stress, right? But it starts off as a low bubble and then starts to get worse when we don't address it, because then it ends up being something like we end up seeing attitudes of like denial that there's a problem, projection that it's somebody else's issue when it's actually ours, where we will repress our own thoughts, our own feelings about a particular situation, even though we might be the subject matter expert on it, because we don't want to be the one that actually is highlighting these particular problems. We can end up getting into blame casting. We're avoiding, addressing the issues. We'll try and distract ourselves from it. Sort of like, I'm going to just avoid all that. Or we'll just rationalize it away. The problem with all that is you end up with essentially an us versus them mentality between management and the engineering and employee staff, right? And that becomes a major issue because we stop seeing ourselves as collaborators together in achieving the desired outcomes for the organization, because essentially the organization's purpose of making money is the reason why we were hired to, resolve those issues as they occurred and help streamline the processes to be more effective. So that's
right. So speaking of, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. So speaking of processes, companies many times, in order to deal with incidents, especially the incidents that maybe happened in the past, organizations creating SOPs, something called standard operation procedures, and that drives kind of the fear down, because now the engineers or technicians, they don't need to deal with thinking about what needs to be done. They have the whole plan is kind of laid out for them, and that effectively reduces the anxiety for them. And you don't need to now come up with a new way. So you already have everything kind of prescriptive, right?
Sure enough. I mean, you're absolutely correct, Alex. I mean, and that does address what we'll call the containment stage of when the event occurs. But then that leads to the next step, which is when the organization itself needs to solve that actual problem so it doesn't occur again, or you come up with a resolution for this particular problem that you're facing. And that in and of itself, without an effective plan to address that gap, creates the chaos that the organization still faces because there's not been a rectification of it.
Right.
Bring up the next slide, if you would, excuse me, Alex, because you have to see where, why, and how a system is operating in a dysfunctional state before you can effectively remedy any system's performance, right? So you've got to be able to do a diagnosis of the system. All problems are best served by addressing that. It's true for organizational systems as it is for engineering systems, equipment, and processes. So you start at the highest level of abstraction, and then you drill down to the causal factors, right? So you start asking why until you get to the root causes. Where and how is it dysfunctional? You find the constraints, the bottlenecks, the compromises, conflicts, and unnecessary trade-offs and sacrifices that impede that system's performance, and then you resolve them, right? Then you put in your plan to be able to essentially execute resolving those particular issues.
Right. Well, interesting. In a lot of organizations that, well, I worked in similar situations, as well as we talking to our customers as well, and managers as well as engineers, they continue to see the same problems over and over again, even to the point that many problems they don't have time to solve. And talking about some sort of system and some sort of different approach that they now need to invest into, they simply don't have the time or the budget to do that.
Yeah, it's a very common problem. I too have seen it a lot. I got an example from when I was at Meggitt, which is an aerospace aviation defense firm, where, I had put together an analysis of the maintenance, repair, overhaul shop that I was working in support of. And one of the major issues was that they didn't have the ability to be able to see where the flow of all of the products were that were going through the process. And so they thus in turn didn't have visibility. The technicians themselves, right, didn't have access to all the right documentation that was even digitally archived. Not all of the technicians had availability to, PCs. And so, I basically had presented the plan to, both the GM as well as the shop manager. And I'm like, hey, this is what will help rectify these issues. And when we identify where all these issues are occurring at, where all the bottlenecks are occurring and the constraints, then we can actually do some real problem solving to improve the process flow, productivity, and all those other things. And it wasn't until, we had a product end up going back to a customer that was not correctly tested because the technician didn't have access to the documentation as they needed to, and they didn't perform the necessary tests. And then it was like a $5,000 hit. And this was, one of many products that was going out the door that particular day. And so I ended up turning around to the general manager and I said, yeah, see that RFQ that's sitting in your inbox there? That's just cost us another $5,000 because we didn't have, this system in place by which to address it. And he immediately signed it that day, and then we ended up implementing that as a solution. And there was quite a bit of a turnaround as a result. We got a 50% reduction in all of our backlog. Our turnaround time went through the roof because now we could see where all the queues were building up, and we could then implement, different solutions at different stations based off of the actual need that we saw that was taking place. But again, we had to get bid again before the GM decided that, to make that necessary investment to prevent a reoccurrence. Excuse me. So that's just one example right there, but it's a very common thing where we just don't feel like we have enough time to invest in our problem solving.
It reminds me about a few examples that I gone through some of the previous positions I worked in. It's from software world, where software engineers, they love to fix things very, very fast, and the faster the better. But what it creates, instead of actually fixing the root cause, they many times patching the problem. So patching the failure or the symptom rather than fixing the actual root cause. And this approach creates many times more problems, and not almost like a snowball effect. So instead of fixing the thing once and forgetting about this, it's a exponentially growing set of problems that then you need to catch up and kind of fight with.
Yeah, absolutely true. It's like we have to be more honest with ourselves and others, in the organization, right? Not so much to the point of brutal honesty, but, almost so, right? It's sort of like we're not being honest enough with what it is we're looking at. So we do need to recognize that we're facing some harsh truths, right? So that are uncomfortable. They push our preconceived notions and assumptions. We have to admit essentially our own ignorance of the situation. And these are all hard things for all of us to face at any point in time in our lives, right? So, I mean, that's
Right.
my best response that I can honestly tell you.
So the following question that comes to my mind, at least, it's why is it that all of that is happening in the first place?
Excellent question. All right, so I have another slide here. All right, cognitive biases. And so that's why people feel like they're in chaos, is because they're actually constrained by their own cognitive biases, as you can see here by what some folks have put together with regards to what they call the cognitive bias index. And basically it acts as psychological inertia, as in entropy, as going down. And so as a result, essentially all of these cognitive biases, they're all essentially operating as unconscious defense mechanisms. And we all have them as humans. They're part of being human, but they take place outside of our conscious awareness of them, right? And another way of saying this means you really can't see them in yourself, but you can absolutely see them in others. And even if you do try and root them out within yourself, you fall into another bias of introspection bias, because you don't have necessarily enough, we'll call it, clarity within yourself to be able to truly see objectively, because you're so wedded to your beliefs and your assumptions. You're not able to separate from them, right? They're a part of who you think you are, right? So that's why that becomes difficult. So along with, these typical defense mechanisms becomes this whole list that I mentioned prior, this whole list of cognitive biases that actually prevent clear decision making, right? So we become victims of our own humanity, right? And all humans are fallible and imperfect. And anybody who assumes that they are perfect, well, that's its own set of problems in and of itself, right? But the more stress that, and feelings of threat to the organization and the like, the worse our decision making actually becomes. Again, that stress has that factor of increasing fear, thus in turn, sort of narrowing our point of view, right? And so we go back to what it is we already know. While they're all typical responses to chaos events, difficulties, problems occurring, right? They actually unhinge us from thinking with any kind of clarity. That's the why.
Right. So cognitive biases, obviously, it's coming from people, and like you said, the fact that we are human beings. How does it manifest into how does it shows itself in the organization?
Yeah. Go to the next slide. I have one for that, where it basically, when the cognitive biases dominate, the feelings unconsciously take over, right? And so, it basically, the issue, if we're going to sum it all up, is we confuse the difference between the content and the process and the outcome we're going to get. So as I was pulling these slides together, I was reminded of what Dr. W. Edwards Deming had said when he wrote his book. I think it was 88, 89, Out of the Crisis was the name of it. And two ones that he specifically pointed out, number 8, number 5, was drive out the fear so that everyone may work effectively for the company. And then the other issue was number 5, which is improve constantly and forever the system of production and service to improve the quality and productivity, and thus constantly be able to decrease costs. So this is really about working together collaboratively to achieve the outcomes of the organization. Unfortunately, as you can see here by this wall, if you will, right, of it's our own fixed idea about root cause or the solution. We rely upon our position or experience or expertise that's actually going to get us out of it, when that may not work, right? It's an incorrect model of the problem. We don't properly understand what's actually taking place. We're unwilling to admit we're wrong, right? We have limited knowledge, and again, it's like we have to relearn a lot of times what's actually taking place, and you can't just assume that you actually do know. We could have cynical attitudes. Not invented here is another one. If we didn't come up with the solution to this, we're not interested in it. I've seen that one a lot. A lot of incorrect assumptions. Our own education sometimes doesn't provide us the necessary background, all of which,
Mhm.
ends up being these social pressures from the organization, the other members in the organization that actually help to sort of, keep us locked into where we're at.
It sounds complicated. This cloud of cognitive biases that end up in psychological inertia, like you mentioned a second ago. It seems like it would be too much for anyone to chew on. How do we potentially address that?
So as I see it, right, cognitive bias is not a problem. But if we think a bit creatively here, we can actually use them as a resource, right, to leverage from rather than the biases being a wall to, that we can actually leverage from, right? So if we look at this slide that we have here, right,
Mhm.
once you can calm yourself down and recognize the fact that not just you, but everybody else is also likewise suffering from these cognitive biases. I mean, if you look back at that cognitive bias codex, and this is where the folks that put that together helped us to figure out what we should be doing about that, is we're using those cognitive biases to deal with four major
Mhm.
issues. We're dealing with too much information. We don't have enough meaning and context to what it is we're looking at. We need to be able to act fast, and we're trying to figure out what it is we should actually remember, right? And so the whole
Right.
purpose of those is to actually be able to solve problems and end the chaos that we're actually facing. Unfortunately, we have all of those individual cognitive biases listing underneath there where we assume we already know the answer when we really don't. I mean, once you calm yourself down, you have to realize that you're also dealing with, cognitive bias, or confirmation bias, negativity bias. That's where, whenever there's a negative effect happens, has a greater effect on your psychological state and the processes than, say, a neutral or positive thing happening, right? And then the confirmation bias comes in and says, couldn't be me, it's got to be somebody else, right? Because we're all perfect, right? That I
Right.
didn't contribute to this. And then there's the other ones, which is like, the illusion of knowledge where where you actually become overconfident, where you overestimate what you know about the problem and what to do about it. And then you have to get past your own illusion of skill acquisition just by, say, watching somebody, do a task 20 times on YouTube, that you too will be able to do that task yourself. You have to learn about
Right.
the system itself and the situation and context, how it does what it does and why, before you are going to be able to get a positive outcome. And
Mhm.
whereby what you've been able to implement as a root cause or creative solution is by essentially leveraging your own natural curiosity about the system and essentially re-engaging that every time you deal with this. So it's about learning or relearning something that you didn't realize or understand before to a deeper level, right? So
Right.
that's why we have these, these major cognitive biases are categorized into these four buckets, but they're more or less supposed to help us. The thing is that we need to recognize, in fact, that we need to leverage these outer aspects of that cognitive bias codex there to help us actually be able to get past where we're at.
Right. So, Rachel, I want to come back to that. What you mentioned before, fear, in the earliest discussion. How do we get out of that? I mean, fear is a fear. Again, it's us being human beings. How do you break out of the cognitive biases, which are also us being human beings? It's our emotional reactions. How do we deal with them when we need to deal with the problem and resolve something?
All right, excellent question, and I think it has two answers, right? Um, and I think we also have to look at some assumptions we're also operating by. First, you've got to have
Mhm.
a method that you can measure, right? So, which method synthesizes too much information into something useful? Which method, provides enough meaning and context to be relevant? Which method focuses on
Mhm.
the key information that we should remember? Which method operates in the shortest time frame to meet our need to act fast? These That's the approach that needs to be understood. Is okay, which method does that, right? And
Right.
so, which brings us, to my next slide, I think I've put together here, right? Which is the second part to answer all that is you've got to have a system of improvement and apply systemized reasoning, right?
Mhm.
Uh, in order to get out of that fear, where so essentially, what to do, where to do it, and how to to address the issues at hand. So when I look at this, the problem or gap that occurs inside of our processes or in our product development activity, and wherever that problem pops up at, we've got to look at the systemic causes, and then we have to find some solutions and remedies to those problems, and then we have to implement the results. Again, it goes back to the purpose of the organization, why we're hired to do what it is we do, which is to help the company make money, right? That's why we're there, right? So, but systemized reasoning about how the system is working and not working, for that matter, functional modeling is one of the key tools we found in the toolbox of methods that engineers, technicians, managers can also use, right? That you can, and then you can also then leverage other methods as a part of understanding where, what, how, when things are occurring, right? Like cause and effect modeling, 5 whys. There's ideal final result. There's zones of conflict. These are all sorts of tools and methods that people can and do use to help free up their thinking, right? And to see what is going on and with the system and promote greater clarity into how that system is operating and functioning. And so I see that as key and fundamental to getting out of the fear.
Okay. You mentioned you mentioned before that we need to look at some assumptions. What did you mean by those?
Yeah, I have another slide for that, if you'll bring that up. So, a lot of times folks assume that the toolboxes of Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, theory of constraints, Toyota production system provide the means and methods by which to overcome these challenges and contradictions within the organization and its processes. And not that they don't work, but they only work up to a point. You see, because during the problem-solving process, you're going to come up to the solution generation stage where these methods of Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, et cetera, right? They only rely upon brainstorming to generate solutions, right? And when we look at this comparison of these methods, it's actually their intent and the primary effect that you get out of these that actually indicates what you're actually going to get from that problem-solving, or program or quality program, whatever you want to call it, that you're actually going to get from it. But, the ones I mentioned all specifically fall back to brainstorming when it comes up to that solution generation stage. And that's where the big limitation comes in and why you're not getting solutions to root cause problems, even if you can identify where the root cause is taking place. And so when you are dealing with it from that point of view, you're not able to you're not able to see where you're going to be able to, where the system's actually breaking down effectively, and then be able to evolve that system, working to a higher level of system performance that you're actually looking for. So, once we've got a clear understanding on the system and the effects we're getting from it in its dysfunctional state, and then zero in on those conflicts, that zone of conflict within the system and the components that are interacting with it, can we then leverage some of these other creative tools to prompt potential solutions? Tools like inventive principles, scientific effects, evolutionary trends of engineering systems, inventive standards. They all suggest how these kinds of conflicts have been resolved by other great inventors out there when they're dealing with these particularly tough to deal with problems. And anytime you're dealing with a problem that has a conflict, compromise, sacrifice, and trade-off going on in it, then you're dealing with actually what they call an inventive problem. You just don't have a solution for it currently. And that's why you need to be able to leverage these kinds of tools. So we're able to leverage these, what I'll call solution patterns that have solved these same type of conflicts in other domains of science and engineering. These help to prompt the engineers and the problem solvers inside the organization, rather than just, relying upon, a lone genius that you likely don't have, right? Or at least many organizations don't have. A lot of smart people, no question about that. It's not a matter of,
right,
of smart, what have you. And the main difference here is between guessing, brainstorming, right, and systemized reasoning. It was the focusing that we're focused in on the root cause of the system's performance and improving it. We're evolving that, and we know where that's taking us. Again, the whole idea is to reduce the fear, come up with an actual solution that actually works. But here's the thing that a lot of them emphasize: brainstorming is great. We come up with a lot of ideas, but they aren't the right idea necessarily to solve the problem at hand. And I don't care how many times people repeat it, doesn't mean it's the same thing. So that's why I'm not a big fan of brainstorming because it just seems to be related to whatever, content you have in your head, that you or other people have in the room, but it may not necessarily be the solution space you actually need to shoot for, right? So, but if you aren't focused on cause and effect of the system, you might as well be throwing darts at a dartboard blindfolded.
Yeah, it's almost like playing casino sometimes, right? And we talked about brainstorming last time that we chatted. So we did talk about the benefits for engineers about all these tools. What about managers? Why would they care? Why do they need to invest in systemized reasoning in the problem solving process?
Fair enough, right? So I think I have a slide there for that, right? So systemized reasoning is about how the system functions, right? So functional modeling, most effective method to start with. Again, not just one engineer, but multiple engineers looking at the problem, and then all being able to use the same kind of framework, right? So functional modeling enables the communications between the different disciplines, between managers and the engineers, as well as technicians, right? So you're able to address the issue of a lack of understanding of what the problem is. And then you're also able to address, the system's complexity, because you're now able to break it apart into all the different components that are interacting with one another. Everybody gets to contribute, right, to how that functional model exists. And then you're able to identify where those zones of conflict are. And again, the whole point of this is to be able to zero in on that cause and effect, and you can use, obviously you'll get to the point where you're using these other methods through the process of doing the systemized reasoning, applying these systematic innovation methods. And so as a result, you're able to reduce the cost, time, and risk. You're addressing communication challenges and the lack of understanding, and it simplifies the complexity that is hiding the defects, and thus improve the quality and productivity overall. But here's the thing: it's about understanding the system and the problem space, right? And that also helps us to calm down even further, right? So here's the thing: as you look at this particular slide we have up here, right? Every time you have a problem occurrence, on the manufacturing line, the product design team, the R&D team, they're all missing a deliverable of some type, right? Then the company is losing money automatically. Anytime a problem occurs, you're losing value from all of the resources, particularly the people inside of the organization. They're one of the more expensive aspects to the organization. You need to be able to leverage them. And that means they need to be able to get an accurate model of the problem, right? And so then they're going to have to come up with an effective solution that needs to be defined. And then they're going to have to implement it. You have to order all the materials that you might need to bring in, or fab up the potential solution. Maybe you have the materials available. But no less, you're losing time and money. Time is money, but you're also losing value, right? So it's like a double hit that happens every time. So this is a time to money formula that I've tried to tie down to what specifically happens inside of organizations every time. If you bring up the next slide, what you'll see is that, and this is where it ties directly to, why managers are, should care about this probably more so than anything else, is the trick is to shorten that time to problem cause and identification, and thus in turn be able to shorten your time to solution generation that, gets you that solution that puts the wheels back onto the process to produce the product going out the door. It all ties back to that time to money argument. If you aren't producing what you need to, you're losing money by not being as effective as you need to be in your problem solving. And this, you're just losing revenue every time there's a delay in getting something to market.
Right. All right. Cool. So let's summarize. It's already been half an hour that we were talking. Let's get to some conclusions here.
All right, sure. So systemized reasoning, functional modeling followed up by cause and effect analysis helps you to synthesize too much information into something useful, provides enough meaning and context, along with these other tools, to be relevant. And then you focus in on the key information you need to remember. You need to remember that zone of conflict where all the conflicts and issues are occurring. And then the same method, right, operates in the shortest time frame to meet your need to act fast. So again, addressing that zone of conflict helps you the most, because that's where all of the issues are occurring. And the method enables us to focus on what's limiting that system performance, the bottlenecks, the limitations, the contradictions, right? And then you can leverage these other tools like inventive principles, scientific effects, trends of engineering, system evolution, inventive standards that resolve those problems, and helps to get the greatest effect that you're actually looking for on shortening that time to solution generation and implementation. So looking at this, chart we have here, if we increase our competency in problem solving and continuous improvement, we can then shorten time to solution implementation. Then we're shortening our time to money, and it enables our increasing our ROI on the organization, equipment, personnel, everything all together, which increases our operating profit. So operating profit and its rate of change over time captures that financial performance of a firm's core business activity and the profitability gained by their running their operations efficiently and effectively, including factories and design teams. It's the accumulative effect of multiple engineering system improvements on both product and process at the same time. CapEx, operational excellence, all together rolled up. It seems too simple to even be true, but in fact, that's the effect that you get. And thus, in turn, it has the cumulative effect of increasing your ROI, capturing the value, and that provides that cumulative effect of increasing the operating profit of the organization. So, what we have here with the Freeze Guru platform, right, and the tools and the training is we help people and organizations to reduce that stress and fear, because they're going to have the methods as a result of being able to apply them and provide them in a way of how to move the organization forward and how to regain control of the organization systems by being able to improve and enhance the problem solving of the organization.
Awesome. So, Richard, thank you very much again. For our listeners, just reminding, I will leave all our details below, and please give us a shout if you want to talk. Thank
you, everybody.
Thanks, Richard.
Appreciate the chat.